Right now, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, a bottlenose dolphin is asleep. Half of it, literally half. The left hemisphere of its brain is generating slow delta waves, the same waves your entire brain produces at 2 in the morning when you are in your deepest sleep. The right hemisphere is fully awake, alert, processing sonar returns, monitoring the surface, watching the pod. And the dolphin's right eye, the one connected to the awake hemisphere, is open, scanning. The left eye is shut. This is not a metaphor. This is not a simplified description of a complex thing. This is exactly what is happening inside the cetacean skull, confirmed with electroencephalography, measured in microvolts, mapped across both hemispheres simultaneously. The dolphin is, in the most literal neurological sense, half awake and half asleep at the same time. The name for this is unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, and once you understand the mechanism behind it, once you understand what it solves, what it costs, and what it implies about the nature of consciousness itself, the most remarkable part is not the dolphin. The remarkable part is what it tells you about your own brain and what yours gave up to become what it is. Start with the problem dolphins had to solve. Every mammal on Earth has the same basic sleep requirement. The brainstem, specifically the ventromedial preoptic nucleus, a cluster of GABAergic neurons in the hypothalamus, periodically suppresses the ascending arousal system, forcing the cortex offline into slow-wave activity. This is not optional. The glymphatic system, a network of fluid channels surrounding cerebral blood vessels, operates at peak clearance only during deep sleep, flushing metabolic waste products, including beta amyloid, the protein whose accumulation is associated with Alzheimer's disease, from the interstitial space of the brain. Without sleep, this clearance fails. Toxins accumulate, neurons begin to die.
Every mammal needs this. Every mammal. Dolphins included. But dolphins breathe air. They are obligate air breathers, descended from land mammals that returned to the sea approximately 50 million years ago during the Eocene epoch, from an ancestor related to the artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates that today include hippos and cows. The return to water solved some problems. It created a catastrophic new one. Because water does not care that you need to sleep. The surface is 30 meters up. Your lungs need it. And if your entire brain goes offline, if you do what every land mammal does and simply lose consciousness, you drown. This is not a minor inconvenience. This is an evolutionary crisis of the first order. Sleep or breathe. For the 50 million years since the cetacean lineage entered the ocean, the solution has been unihemispheric sleep. And to understand how it works, you need to understand something about the mammalian cortex that most people never learn. The two hemispheres of the mammalian brain are not simply mirrors of each other. They are connected by a thick cable of approximately 200 to 250 million axons called the corpus callosum. And through this connection, they ordinarily synchronize. When sleep pressure builds, when adenosine, the molecular byproduct of neurometabolism, accumulates to sufficient concentration, the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus fires. The arousal system drops, and both hemispheres enter slow-wave activity together. This is what your brain does every night, full bilateral shutdown.
Dolphins do not do this. Research conducted by Oleg Liamin and Jerome Siegel at the UCLA Semel Institute, published in the journal PLOS One in 2008, attached EEG electrodes to the scalps of bottlenose dolphins in controlled aquarium conditions and recorded the electrical activity of both hemispheres continuously over multiple days. What they found was not alternating sleep, not the right hemisphere sleeping, then waking, then the left hemisphere sleeping. What they found was simultaneous bilateral independence, both hemispheres doing different things at the same time. one generating 0.5 to 4 Hz delta waves, one generating the faster, lower amplitude activity of wakefulness, at the same time in the same skull. The corpus callosum, that 200 million axon bridge, appears to be actively suppressed during unihemispheric sleep. The mechanism is not fully characterized, but the leading hypothesis involves asymmetric norepinephrine release. The locus coeruleus, a small nucleus in the brainstem that projects norepinephrine throughout the cortex, appears to fire preferentially into the awake hemisphere during unihemispheric sleep, maintaining arousal there while the sleeping hemisphere is allowed to drop into slow-wave activity. The dolphin's brainstem is running two separate arousal states simultaneously by selectively bathing one hemisphere in a wakefulness-maintaining neurotransmitter while withdrawing it from the other. This is not a crude trick. It is a feat of neural engineering that took 50 million years to develop, and that your brain, for reasons that are actually very interesting, cannot do at all.
But there is a second mechanism operating at the same time, and this one is stranger. During unihemispheric sleep, the dolphin's eye, contralateral to the sleeping hemisphere, the eye on the opposite side of the body from the awake brain, closes. The eye ipsilateral to the awake hemisphere stays open. What that open eye is doing is not passive. Dolphins have what is called a tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer behind the retina, similar to the structure that makes cat eyes glow in the dark, and their visual processing during unihemispheric sleep is not degraded. The awake hemisphere is processing a fully functional visual field from that open eye, integrating it with sonar returns from the melon, the fatty acoustic lens in the dolphin's forehead, and using it to navigate, maintain position in the pod, and monitor for predators. In 2012, a study by Sam Ridgway and colleagues at the U.S. Navy Marine Mammal Program in San Diego demonstrated that dolphins could perform cognitive tasks, responding to visual stimuli, tracking moving objects, with the eye connected to the awake hemisphere, even while the other hemisphere was in confirmed slow-wave sleep. The sleeping half of the brain did not interfere with the performance of the awake half in any measurable way. The two hemispheres were functionally independent in real time. Think about what that means for a moment. The assumption embedded in how we talk about sleep, in how medicine talks about it, in how neuroscience models it, is that sleep is a whole brain state, that consciousness and unconsciousness are binary. You are awake or you are asleep. The dolphin's brain is a direct experimental refutation of that assumption, running in a living animal, continuously, for the animal's entire life.
And here is where the story becomes even more interesting. Dolphins are not the only animals that do this. The unihemispheric sleep system is documented across the cetacean order: bottlenose dolphins, Pacific white-sided dolphins, beluga whales, porpoises, and it appears in a phylogenetically unrelated group, birds. Specifically, birds that need to maintain vigilance while resting, including mallard ducks, frigate birds, and certain species of swift that remain airborne for months at a time during migration. In 1999, Niels Rattenborg at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology studied mallard ducks sleeping in rows and found that the birds at the ends of the row, the ones with one side exposed to open space, showed significantly higher rates of unihemispheric sleep with the eye facing outward remaining open compared to the birds in the middle of the row. When the researchers rearranged the ducks so that different individuals occupied the end positions, the new end birds showed the same pattern. The birds were choosing which hemisphere to sleep based on perceived predator risk on a given side. They were selecting which eye to close and therefore which hemisphere to put to sleep based on a real-time threat assessment. The brain was making a strategic decision about its own sleep architecture in real time based on environmental information.
In 2016, Rattenborg and a team from the Max Planck Institute
published data in Nature Communications tracking frigate birds with EEG backpacks during transoceanic flights lasting up to 10 days. They found evidence of unihemispheric sleep occurring in flight, both one hemisphere at a time and, occasionally for very brief periods, both hemispheres simultaneously while the bird continued to fly. The total daily sleep during these flights was less than 1 hour. On land, frigate birds sleep 12 or more hours per day. Something about the flight state, possibly the proprioceptive feedback from wings, possibly the visual input from the horizon, was allowing the birds to dramatically reduce sleep pressure or to make sleep so efficient in brief bilateral bursts that 1 hour was sufficient. I should be clear, this finding has not been fully replicated and the mechanism is not understood. The evidence is preliminary. But the implication is direct. Sleep duration and sleep architecture may be far more plastic than human sleep medicine has historically assumed, because they evolved under different pressures in different bodies, and what looks like a fixed biological requirement from our vantage point may be a constraint that is specific to our particular brain design. Now let's talk about what the dolphin system costs. Unihemispheric sleep does not fully replicate the restorative function of bilateral slow-wave sleep. Lyman and Siegel's work, along with studies by Patrick McNamara at Boston University's Sleep and Neuroimaging Laboratory, has shown that the glymphatic clearance occurring in the sleeping dolphin hemisphere is real. The delta waves are genuine slow-wave activity, and the metabolic waste clearance associated with them appears to proceed normally in the sleeping hemisphere. But the awake hemisphere is not clearing. It is running. It is processing sonar, maintaining muscle tone for swimming, monitoring visual input, regulating breathing timing. It is doing all of this without sleep, and it has to wait. The dolphin alternates. After a period of right hemisphere sleep, the hemispheres switch. Left hemisphere wakes, right hemisphere sleeps. The eye pattern reverses. The dolphin turns, repositioning in the water so the newly awake eye faces the direction of potential threat. And this switching appears to occur in bouts of minutes to hours, not in a single long cycle. The hemispheres do not switch once per day, they alternate multiple times, in a pattern that ensures both hemispheres eventually receive slow-wave sleep within every 24-hour period, but neither receives the prolonged continuous bilateral sleep that you get every night. What this costs the dolphin cognitively is a genuinely open research question. Dolphins are among the most cognitively sophisticated non-human animals on Earth. They pass mirror self-recognition tests, which requires an internal model of the self. They use tools, specifically sponges, to protect their rostrums while foraging on the seafloor, a behavior documented by Janet Mann at Georgetown University and colleagues in Shark Bay, Australia, published in Science in 2005. They have demonstrated episodic memory, cultural transmission of learned behaviors, and what appears to be theory of mind. Whether the unihemispheric sleep constraint is a ceiling on their cognition, a tax they pay for being air-breathing ocean mammals, is not known. The comparison is confounded by every other difference between dolphin and primate neurology.
But here is what is known. The dolphin brain is large, extremely large. The encephalization quotient, the ratio of actual brain mass to expected brain mass for a given body size of the bottlenose dolphin, is 4.14. The human EQ is approximately 7.4 to 7.8, depending on the measurement method. The common chimpanzee is 2.2 to 2.5. The dolphin's brain is proportionately larger than every other non-human animal except humans. It has a highly convoluted cortex with a gyrification index, a measure of cortical folding, that actually exceeds the human brain in absolute terms. More folds, more surface area, more neurons per square centimeter of cortex in some regions. And that brain evolved its extraordinary architecture under the constraint of never fully shutting down, never going completely offline. Every neuron that developed, every circuit that wired up, every cognitive capacity that emerged, All of it was built in a brain that has never, in 50 million years of evolutionary history, experienced the bilateral unconsciousness you will enter tonight when you fall asleep. And here's the part of this story that I find quietly remarkable. Your brain cannot do any of this. Not the unihemispheric sleep, not the bilateral independence, not the selective hemisphere suppression. The human corpus callosum is too dense, the interhemispheric connectivity too tightly coupled, the arousal system too globally organized. When your ventrolateral preoptic nucleus fires, it does not have a mechanism for confining the suppression to one side. Your arousal system is a broadcast. It goes everywhere or nowhere. This is not a design flaw. It is a trade-off that enabled something else. The tight bilateral coupling of the human brain, the way your two hemispheres are in constant high-bandwidth communication through the corpus callosum, is the substrate of something the dolphin does not have. It is the substrate of the kind of cross-hemispheric integration that allows for the dense, recursive, language-capable, future-simulating prefrontal architecture that humans have. Language requires both hemispheres. The left hemisphere, in most humans, handles syntax and phonological processing. The right hemisphere handles prosody, pragmatics, metaphor. A rapid sentence, "The meeting is at 3 unless it rains," crosses the corpus callosum multiple times in the milliseconds it takes to parse. This is only possible because the two hemispheres are in constant, rapid, synchronized communication. Unihemispheric sleep is incompatible with a brain architecture built on interhemispheric integration. You cannot have both. The dolphin chose the ocean. Its brain built a system that works in the ocean. Your ancestors stayed on land, and your brain built a system that works on land, a system that requires complete bilateral shutdown every night and, in exchange, gives you the tight hemispheric coupling that makes recursive thought, language, and high-level abstraction possible. There is one documented human analog to unihemispheric sleep, and it is not something anyone would choose. In patients with complete corpus callosotomy, the surgical severing of the corpus callosum performed as a last resort treatment for intractable epilepsy, researchers at Dartmouth and Caltech, including the pioneering work of Michael Gazzaniga and Roger Sperry, published in the 1960s and 70s, documented what happens when the two hemispheres are surgically decoupled. The split-brain patients showed something remarkable. The two hemispheres could hold different beliefs, different preferences, different intentions simultaneously with no awareness of the other state. The left hemisphere, which controls language, could report one thing. The right hemisphere, which controls the left hand, could act on something completely different. The two halves of the same person disagreed with each other, without either knowing the other existed. Sperry won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1981 for this work. What the split brain research revealed, and what the dolphin's unihemispheric sleep makes viscerally real, is that the unity of consciousness, the experience of being a single, unified observer inside your own skull, is not a given. It is not the default state of a brain. It is an achievement. It is the product of constant, high-bandwidth bilateral integration that your corpus callosum maintains every moment you are awake and that your brain pays for every night in a complete, whole-body shutdown that a dolphin has never experienced and is incapable of undergoing.
Now, the original version of this script used the word terrifying at this point, but I think the real question is more interesting than fear. If unihemispheric sleep shows that conscious experience can run in half a brain while the other half is offline, if the frigate bird data hints that even bilateral sleep can be compressed to near zero under certain conditions, then what exactly is sleep protecting in your case? What is your brain doing during those 8 hours that the dolphin does in rotating shifts and the frigate bird apparently negotiates on the fly? The glymphatic clearance answer is well supported. Mike and Nethergaard at the University of Rochester, in a 2013 paper in Science, demonstrated using two-photon microscopy in live mice that the interstitial space of the sleeping brain expands by approximately 60% compared to the awake state, dramatically increasing the flow of cerebrospinal fluid and the rate at which metabolic byproducts are cleared. This likely applies to humans. The anatomical architecture is conserved. The glymphatic system needs sleep. The brain you are using right now is accumulating metabolic debt that will be cleared tonight, the same way it is cleared every night, the same way it has been cleared every night since your species developed a brain capable of generating the waste. But the glymphatic explanation does not fully account for the cognitive restoration of sleep. Memory consolidation during slow-wave sleep, the process by which hippocampal replay transfers the day's experiences to long-term cortical storage, is well documented. Jan Born at the University of Tübingen has spent decades mapping the molecular mechanisms of sleep-dependent memory consolidation, showing that slow oscillations during NREM sleep coordinate the reactivation of hippocampal memory traces in temporal sequence, transferring them to the neocortex for integration into long-term knowledge. This is not happening in the dolphin's awake hemisphere. The dolphin's awake hemisphere is monitoring the ocean. It is not consolidating memories from the previous hour's experience. The sleeping hemisphere may be, doing so only in its half of the encoded experience. Whether dolphin memory consolidation is impaired by this architecture is, again, not known. The dolphin's episodic memory appears intact by behavioral measures, but the comparison is deeply confounded, and the honest answer is that the science has not resolved it. Here is the evidence calibration. The glymphatic function of sleep, replicated across multiple species, directly measured, well supported, is at a high level of certainty. The sleep-dependent memory consolidation in humans, extensive, replicated, and mechanistically characterized, is also high certainty. The application of that mechanism to unihemispheric sleep in dolphins is inferred, not measured. The frigate bird flight data is preliminary, based on a small sample, and the mechanism is uncharacterized. These are different levels of knowing. They are all interesting. They are not all equally established. I think it's important to say that directly. Science, communication, often flattens uncertainty, but the honest truth is, we are still figuring much of this out.
Now, let's bring this together. A dolphin sleeping on the surface of the Pacific Ocean right now is running two simultaneous neurological programs inside the same skull. One hemisphere is in slow-wave sleep, its glymphatic channels open, cerebrospinal fluid washing through, metabolic byproducts being cleared, memory traces being consolidated from the recent past. The other hemisphere is awake, its locus coeruleus bathing it in norepinephrine, its sonar system actively pinging the environment, its open eye scanning for sharks, its motor cortex maintaining the muscle activity required for the flukes to keep the animal at the surface. The corpus callosum between them is suppressed. The bridge between two minds in the same body is deliberately kept quiet so that each can do what it needs to do. This is a brain that solved the problem of being a mammal in the ocean in the only way that works over 50 million years of selection pressure. And it built, in doing so, one of the most cognitively sophisticated minds on Earth. Not despite the constraint, possibly because of it. Because a brain that cannot afford to fully shut down has to build resilience, redundancy, and flexibility into every circuit from the beginning. Tonight, when you lose consciousness, when your ventrolateral preoptic nucleus fires and your arousal system goes quiet and your glymphatic channels open and your corpus callosum stops carrying the traffic of thought, you are doing the thing your brain was built to do in the only way your brain can do it. The same way your species has done it for hundreds of thousands of years on land. The full shutdown, the bilateral silence. The thing the dolphin's brain has never once done in 50 million years of evolution. You will be, for a few hours, more completely unconscious than any dolphin has ever been. And the dolphin will still be awake, half of it at least, watching. I don't find that terrifying.
I find it humbling. We are not worse than dolphins. We are not better. We are different. Evolution does not rank its solutions. It simply finds what works. For them, that means a brain that cannot fully shut down. For us, it means a brain that can dream, plan, and tell stories about dolphins sleeping in the Pacific Ocean. That is not a horror story. That is just the strange, beautiful, deeply mysterious reality of life on this planet. Thanks for watching.